All right, good afternoon, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm Brandon Cannaday. I am the Chief Product Officer here at Losant, and welcome to our Deeper Dive webinar series. So this is a relatively new series, and it comes in two different forms. The previous one that you may have participated in as well kind of covers specific solutions. But this one, and why I'm on it, this covers specific features in the platform. So as we release major new updates, we're going to hold these webinars and kind of take a deeper dive into what those are, how those work, and so on and so forth. So speaking today, like I said, you've got me, I'm Brandon Cannaday, I'm the Chief Product Officer, and then joining me at the end, he's going to answer all those technical questions, is Dylan Schuster. He leads our team of UX engineers. So everything we see today came to life because of Dylan and his team. Speaking of questions, throughout the webinar, at any time, you can ask a question. We will do those at the end. I believe near the bottom or the menu on the Zoom interface, you should see a Q&A button. If you click that, that will bring up an interface that will allow you to ask questions. We will be answering those at the end, but that doesn't mean you should wait till the end to ask them. At any moment, at any time, as I'm speaking, if something does come to mind, please just put that in there, and then we will go through those and hopefully address everyone's questions prior to the end of the webinar. We try to keep these deeper dive things pretty short. We know everyone's busy, so we've got no more than 30 minutes of planned content, and then we can use the remainder of the hour for all those questions. So anyone can feel free to stay during the questions or ask questions if they'd like. Just a reminder, I think everyone's probably pretty familiar with the Losant platform, but what we are is an application enablement platform. We help companies kind of realize whatever their IoT vision is by providing a technology foundation all the way from the edge to those full end user experiences. And I brought this slide up because you'll see some of the changes we made to the interface kind of mirror what this slide does and how we talk about Losant. So this is, we call them components. The platform itself is very tightly integrated, so these are not treated as different services. We just kind of broke it apart in order to communicate kind of where we begin and where we end in an IoT development stack. And this also kind of describes the journey a lot of you as our users will go through while developing with Losant. So onboarding a device either through their edge compute agent or maybe directly connected to the platform. So then you got your devices and data sources. Once you've got them connected, you're going to look at them through our dashboards or data visualization. Then maybe you start reacting on it, building your business logic through our visual workflow engine, and then finally culminating in some kind of end user experience, presenting that information back in a secure and completely tailored way. So at a 10,000 foot view, that's kind of what the Losant IoT platform is. And we've provided this technology and this foundation for a lot of organizations, both big and small, across a lot of different use cases, primarily in the industrial space, so industrial equipment monitoring, condition-based maintenance, maybe smarter services and support routines, but also on the smart environment space. So our previous deeper dive webinar got into that smart environment, so conference room, buildings, campuses, how we make the places that we work in and live in on a day-to-day basis a little more enjoyable and a little more technology enabled. But without further ado, this webinar is an introduction into Losant's new user interface. So we have spent a lot of time and energy on this new user interface. We've taken feedback a lot directly from you about how you use Losant. We've kind of also extrapolated a lot of that from kind of looking at on a broader sense how people organize their applications and all those resources, and then our own internal teams, how we go about development. And we really presented with yesterday's release a really different way to navigate through and access and improve the efficiency when it comes to developing applications in Losant. So what I'm gonna do now is very quickly just show what Losant used to look like. Quick reminder, this is an application overview page. You're probably very familiar with this if you're a Losant user. All the navigation was on the top. You've got your dashboards, you've got your applications. Underneath the applications menu, you've got the ability to access all your resources. And then underneath in the main content area was where the dashboards were displayed and where all your content and your resources would be edited. So now I'll switch to kind of the new live interface, and you can see it's a pretty big departure from what that was. But it's also similar in a lot of ways. That same navigation, those menus across the top are now presented on the side. So you've still got the dashboards menu, still got the applications menu, you still got your organizations, your user account, and help. So we kind of took that top bar and flipped it on its side and stacked it vertically. You also notice this kind of blue bar. We push quite a few updates out to our platform. Our release cycles anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks. And it can be pretty easy sometimes to miss that new functionality that could be really valuable to you. So whenever a new platform update comes out, this little blue bar will pop up and give you a link to that blog article to read more details. But you can just dismiss that so it doesn't always use up your real estate. And then that'll go away until the next update comes out and shows you what might be new. So when it comes to that application menu itself, whereas before it was across the top, we kind of turned that sideways and made it vertical as well. And this kind of comes out of, basically industry best practices at this point. This is what people are more comfortable with. This is where the software world is going. And it also comes out of just looking at the data. We track through, the typical Google Analytics tracking that we can get, the typical browsers and resolutions. And what we find is most of our users have a lot more available horizontal real estate than vertical real estate. So we wanted to optimize the available screen space that you have and move some stuff around to provide more real estate for important stuff. You'll also notice on the menu itself, we kind of regrouped it to match that component slide that I just talked about. So when we go and talk about Losant externally, it's usually in devices, data sources, visualization, workflow engine, and experiences. So what we did was we took all those menu items on the top that were very kind of mostly randomized and then grouped those in much more creative ways. So you'll see that same grouping. You got devices, data sources, visualization, workflow engine, and experiences. So generally, when a new user comes into Losant, as they go through their journey of developing an application, they're going to start at the top and kind of work their way down as that application gets built. One of the changes that you might notice is we took access keys and API tokens, and we kind of split those up. Prior to this release, those were tucked under and they were grouped together under the security tab, but they are typically used for two very different purposes. The access keys are very specific for device authentication, so it made a lot more sense to put it up here with devices. And then the API tokens are usually for service-to-service type integrations, where you might have a backend service that would like to either orchestrate or communicate with Losant's API itself. So that's generally done down here. You usually create those once or twice, maybe in the life of an application. So we move those down into the settings. You'll also notice the application log. It works very similar to the previous log. However, we did expand it to the full height of the screen, give you a little more space there. And we also changed the visual style to more closely match the real-time log that's in the workflow engine. So we wanted to take some of our UI components and really standardize those and make those similar across different parts of the application itself. This application is actually, as you can see, it's an inventory tracking. So I'll mostly be hanging out here for this demo. It's got a gateway, an edge compute gateway, and it's got two peripheral devices that are scales. So we've got two bins. One of them holds some bolts, one of them holds some nuts, and those are connected to a serial interface on the gateway, and that's what we see streaming up into this application. So I wanted to provide a little bit of context as I navigate around. So if I go into a device itself, we can see some minor changes to the interface in here. For the most part, on all pages, the content, the resources, the editing view itself is unchanged. So we didn't make a lot of changes in how to configure and set up a device. We mostly made changes to how we navigate around those various pages. So if you can recall from the previous UI, these available tabs used to be on the side, and now we've moved them to the top. So it's got the same tabs that you're used to, the debug, data, and simulator and edge compute, except now they're on the top. And this is replicated through many other places in our platform that had those side tabs. Now they've just moved to the top. We also moved the connection log, and as we can see, I just got disconnected. The connection log itself used to be under the debug. However, we're trying to standardize on where we put logging information, so they're just reconnected. So you'll see the connection log has moved from the debug tab previously over into kind of what we call this logging area. So if you're looking for that real-time log information, check out the right side of the screen as we move forward and we continue to add various logging information. Next, I'll go into a workflow. Workflows, the editor itself did not make many changes. We didn't make many changes to the editor, but this is a really good way to highlight the ability to collapse this navigation. So you definitely want some real estate when editing the workflow. So it's important to be able to collapse these. You can also collapse this one. If you mouse over it, you'll see a blue line, a subtle blue line highlight. You can click that, and now you've got a ton of space to work on your workflow. So this is a good, quick pro tip to get some additional space on the screen if you need it back. On the breadcrumbs, you'll see there's a little drop down that's been added. Anywhere there's versioning inside Losant, and right now that is on workflows or experiences, we've now added this drop down to quickly change between those versions. So before it was a little bit kludgy to find wherever the versions were at and then be able to switch to them. But now if you're looking at a specific version of a resource, there'll be a drop down always available on the top. So you'll see it in the workflows, and as well, if I go into an experience, you'll see that same drop down to be able to quickly change between those. We also revamped the breadcrumbs themselves. What we found, this was mostly internally, is anytime I was on a resource, let me jump to a device, I really wanted a quick way to get back to that collection of devices. So the breadcrumbs, if you read them, now the full page from left to right, you'll kind of see this story. It's whatever application you're looking at, and you can click that and quickly change your application as well. Then it's the collection or whatever resource you're looking at, and then it's the specific resource you're editing. So that's kind of the story you'll read as you look across the top left of the screen. So I can very quickly always go back to that list of devices and switch between them. So one of the larger changes we've made beyond just cosmetic is the switch from essentially organization or sandbox owned dashboards to application owned dashboards. We made this change because what we had found, even internally, all the dashboards we create, and as we watched all of our users create dashboards, was very high percentage of them treated the dashboard as essentially part of the application. They were always presenting information for devices within a single application. When we had launched this platform many years ago, we thought it was a neat idea. You know, maybe people want to create a single dashboard and pull information from multiple applications. And whereas we still have that capability, we found the vast majority of us internally and our users really just wanted one dashboard tied and part of that application. So you'll see on the new data visualization menu, there's a dashboard submenu, and these dashboards are now essentially owned by the application. So in this case, since I've got my inventory tracker application, inside it, I can view its dashboard. And what's really cool is I can then very quickly navigate between the resources that are populating the dashboard and the dashboard itself. Whereas previously you have to go to the top, and that separation of dashboards and application was pretty big. And sometimes it was hard to get to the actual application if you wanted to make changes to those devices. We did automatically migrate as many dashboards as we could. We went out and looked at the entire system of devices or dashboards. Many thousands of them are created. And if we determined they were only showing data from a single application, we went ahead and put that in the application. So you might find now some dashboards already in your application. We just went ahead and put them there if it made sense. However, you can still access them in the exact same way that you're used to, the main dashboards menu. You can say view all dashboards, and that's kind of where it's very similar to where you might have seen them before. And just like previously, those main menus do show your recent dashboards and recent applications, so you can very quickly switch between those. There are some dashboards we were not able to migrate, and there's some examples here that I have. So if a dashboard contained data from multiple applications, they're not going to be placed under those multiple specific applications. They'll still be owned by whatever organization or whatever sandbox previously owned them. Basically, we made no changes to it. And you can see that in the list by looking at the specific icons. So in this case, I'm looking at all of my available dashboards, and what is listed here as well. This one's owned by multiple applications, so it's just still part of the Losant Smart Office organization. And the icon here is our new organization icon to let you know that this one, we weren't able to put it under a single application. It's just still owned by an organization. For the most part, it works exactly like you're used to. Speaking of kind of the organizations, we did make some changes to that user interface as well. We had to because now dashboards are part of an application that gives you a little extra flexibility in how you can design this permission scheme. So we had to make some changes there. So if I go into an organization, let's jump into our Smart Office organization and add a user here and kind of show that off. So let's say I want to add a user Jane at example.com. For the most part, the permission system is very similar. However, the new UI makes it a lot more intuitive to understand what exactly is going on and how these permissions are inherited from kind of the higher level resource to lower level resources. So if I change this new user's permission to none, this is a very popular choice. So you can invite a member into your organization, set the default, basically organization level permission to none, which means they're, with no other changes, they can't access anything. But then you can come in and specifically grant access to a single application. So something like system integrators or development agencies where you might have an organization and you're doing work on behalf of many different clients. You may have an application per client and you can invite that end client, your end customer, directly in to only that application. So in this case, you'll see the inherited role. This is basically saying, well, what do I get from my higher level permission? In this case, they're all none, but I can override it. So I have given Jane collaborator permission to the Cincinnati weather application. Then if you look down at dashboards, you'll see since the Cincinnati weather dashboard is now owned by this application, it has that inherited role. So because you've granted access to that application, she does get access to all the dashboards. They're just treated like another resource in that application. But you can override that as well. So in this case, let's say I wanted Jane to not be able to edit that dashboard, but she should be able to view it. So now she can edit basically any other resources, the workflows and devices in the application, but she can only view this specific dashboard. A little bit about these icons. So we did roll out some icons in various places. It'd be helpful to know kind of what we're talking about at various places in the application. So anywhere you see this symbol, which I interpreted as 4 people sitting around a table, that's our organization icon. That's kind of the highest level organization. If you click on the organizations menu and you see your list of organizations, you'll see that icon there. If you go into kind of a dashboard list, and you'll see that organization icon here, which means this dashboard is owned by this organization. That's, if anywhere you see that symbol, we're kind of talking about an organization. The other symbol is a circle with some characters in it. In that case, we're talking about an application. So we'll see those. If you go to your application list, you'll see all those applications. The circle with the symbol means just takes the first letter of the first 2 words and puts it in there. And then the color will match the same color as the highest level organization. So kind of a visual cue to help distinguish the entire ownership tree. So in this case, I'm a member of 2 organizations. One of them is this dark blue color and one of them is this light tan color. So anywhere I see an application so with the light blue color, I know that's a Smart Office organization. Anywhere I see the dark, that's the Losant Solutions demo organization. Allows me to quickly understand at a visual glance what that model might be. And then there's the sandbox icon itself. So you can put dashboards and applications that are just part of your sandbox. We treat that as kind of a testing environment, an exploration environment prior to becoming an enterprise account where you then have more proper organization. But in that case, you'll see, it's a little hard to see on mine, but that'll be your gravatar based on your email address. So a lot of times that's your face. So you'll see a picture of your face with the name of the application, you know, oh, that's owned by my personal sandbox. One of the coolest features we've added in this update is the application-wide search. So it was always a little bit challenging to navigate very quickly between different resources, but now there's this new search menu and it's hotkeyed. I'm on a Mac, so it's Option L. If you're on Windows, it's Alt L to very quickly go there and do an application-wide search for a lot of different types of resources. It also shows the recent devices and workflows. If I quickly go back to the previous navigation, you'll see devices and workflows used to be a drop-down, and you would see the 5 most recent resources of each. It was a very good way to quickly switch between actively developed resources. But we've kept that, so when you click the search, you'll get up to 5 devices and 5 workflows in the recent list here. So you still have that quick ability to switch between resources you might be actively working on. There's some quick links for kind of common tasks that we see people doing a lot, which is, looking at devices, all devices, maybe adding a workflow, adding some dashboards. But what's cool is you can search. So, if I wanted to get to my read scales edge workflow, I can just go in here and type scale, and I quickly get my item. I can pretty much immediately navigate over to that workflow. Go back to a device, and it searches other types of resources as well. So I've got some endpoints in this application. I can jump to an endpoint. So it's a very quick way to navigate through. So hopefully, I know we have already internally been big users of that feature. I expect a lot of people would be jumping on that. So in the last few moments, before we get into some Q&A, I did want to talk a little bit about the future, kind of why we did some of these changes, specifically around moving the dashboards into the application itself. And that's part of a much larger initiative that we're pursuing. So we do this a lot, and kind of how we take on product development is, we set our end goal, some big initiative into the future, and then we kind of work backwards from that. So, well, what can we deliver that's valuable to our users that lead up to that end goal? And for us, that goal is what we kind of call application portability. We want to have that ability to essentially export most of our types of resources as a reusable template, leading all the way up to an entire application that includes the experiences, the workflows, the dashboards, the device recipes, essentially everything we can think of. We can export the entire thing as a template and then move that to a different organization or different application and import that back in. So you can get some huge time savings on that. So if you have an internal development team, you can kind of build up these reusable templates. We'd like to kind of launch a catalog of these applications, very similar to what we did with the custom nodes. Our custom nodes and the node catalog was also a stepping stone toward this end goal of being able to import and export these reusable components all the way up to the application. But in order to do that, since we saw the dashboard so closely tied to the applications, we kind of had to make this one step towards that direction and move the dashboard into the application so that it could eventually be bundled up together with the application and then imported as a way to bootstrap new development. So that was just a little glimpse into kind of our high-level process, how we think about roadmaps, and then specifically, I think there's an awful lot of benefits around the application or the dashboard being associated with the application, but there's also this kind of future benefits that we also receive by making that step today. So at that point, I think I've covered all of the high levels of the new user interface, some of the new functionality it brings, and where we've kind of maybe placed and moved around some of that functionality you might already be familiar with. The primary goal of this webinar was to expose that, walk through it, provide our reasoning. That way, when you guys log in the next day, this wasn't a big surprise where you had to go find all of your resources and all your functionality again. So at this point, we do have a few questions queued up, which is awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and iterate through these. This is where Dylan Schuster, he leads our front-end engineering team. He's going to come in, jump in, and answer a bunch of these. So the first one is a pretty good one, great one for Dylan. What technology was your front end built with? So basically Dylan, can you go into a little bit like what's our tech stack, even to, we treat our user interface kind of like an API client, so a little bit about how that works. Yeah, that'd be a great place to start.
Yeah, this is Dylan Schuster. I'm the lead UX engineer here at Losant. Onto that question, the user interface you're seeing right here is really just a wrapper around the same public API that everybody has access to, the same REST API that's available in our documentation. say for a couple private endpoints here and there, pretty much everything that our users have access to interact with the API to create devices and workflows, et cetera. We're using that exact same API in the interface right here. As far as what is actually built in the web technology is React.js. It is a single-page application framework developed by Facebook, actually. Very popular these days. It's akin to Angular to JS or Ember or a couple of other ones. That's pretty much the stack. So the front end is just like any web application, a combination of JavaScript, HTML, and CSS to bring you what you see right here, making requests to the API behind the scenes to populate everything that you see on screen.
All right, awesome. I got another question here. This is a great one. It extends a little bit into our available permissions. I definitely didn't cover this in the example, but Dylan, could you please answer a question here? Can members have access to dashboards only and not the application?
Yes, but with the potential for things to get a little bit weird, because so in this model, what you can do is grant access to a dashboard and only a dashboard. I guess, Brandon, if you're going to navigate to that screen to show. But if you were not to give access to the application, the result that you're going to have there is that the user that you're granting permissions to may see the dashboard. But even if you give them collaborator permission on the dashboard as if to edit it, they're really not going to be able to change any of the blocks, but because if you have not given them any kind of access to the application, they're not going to have permission to fetch the list of devices and the attributes and everything else you would need to configure almost every dashboard block that's out there. Short answer, yes, but do so at your own peril. It could get a little bit strange, and it would be extremely difficult for your user to make any edits to the dashboard.
Yeah, I think essentially that mirrors what we had previously. So what I had set up here on the screen is view-only access to a dashboard. And that's very common. If you're developing multiple applications, you can go in and just grant them view-only access. That just lets external stakeholders check out your data. You probably don't even want them to collaborate on that and make changes to it. And like Dylan said, because you didn't grant them any access to the application, they wouldn't actually be able to see a lot of the information that might be required to edit it. But this is a very common one. And what would happen when you grant them view-only access? Essentially, that just shows up for them right in the View All Dashboards link. They'll click that, and that dashboard will show up. They can click it and view it. They just won't see the application behind the scenes. Oh, here's an interesting question since we talked a little bit about the API. How do you get access to the Losant API that actually powers that UI? So Dylan, can you go into that? Like, how do people get access to the underlying API?
Yeah, sure. So as far as the web interface that you're seeing right here, when you are logged in and making edits to your applications, you are logged in under the scope of a Losant user. And that gives you, whatever permissions that you've been granted within your organization, as well as, of course, full permissions on anything that's owned by your sandbox to create resources, edit them, make any changes, delete resources, etc. Now, if you wanted to programmatically make changes to the API and not log in as a user, which is how most people are going to do it when they interact with our REST API, you'd want to generate an API token. You can see the link in the towards the bottom of the application navigation down there. Yeah, Brandon, if you can click on it. Now, what's cool about this is that you can get extremely granular in the permissions that you want to allow a user, to allow this token to interact with. You can give them access to everything, which is every single API endpoint. You can give them read-only access, which was a quick shortcut to let them view but not edit anything. Or as you see this really, really long list here of all the different API calls that are in the Losant API, you can check individual sections or individual queries or actions themselves. And only as an example, let this token get and update devices but not create devices or delete devices would be a good example of that. This is, I just want to point out, this is different from authenticating as a device against the MQTT broker, which is managed through the access keys up in the devices section. Through the broker, you can send commands down to the device, receive commands, I guess, on the device or send device state up, but you can't really do anything as far as the metadata of the device itself. You can't change the name of it, add tags, et cetera. That all would be done through the REST API with the token that you generate here.
All right, cool. This is a great question. Since we introduced the search, we've got a question here that kind of expands a little bit on that. So is there an overall search, regardless if it's a device, attribute, or text, within a dashboard? So I think that question is, can I add a block, maybe the dashboard, that allows people consuming a dashboard to search the resources within that application?
Within a dashboard, not yet, I would say. That doesn't mean that we could not add that in. At the moment, the scope of the search is to find resources within an application. That's, as Brandon already pointed out, most commonly devices and workflows, but a lot of other resources inside of there. Pretty much anything that has a name, we're doing a search by the name of the resource, or some things that are named like, such as an experienced user searching by their email, domain names and slugs and experienced domains, similar thing. But that's a good suggestion. We can certainly catalog that and kind of think about how this search looks moving forward, and what other things are our users actually searching for and trying to use the platform to achieve.
Perfect. So here's another one that I think I can answer since I've got the screen up here. Will you add recent workflow and recent device lists like the previous version UI? So I might have covered that a little too quickly, but I'll just show where that is in the new interface. I agree. He went on to list a specific use case where switching is valuable, but where those lists live now is right in the search. So if you click the search, we pre-populate that with those two lists. So here's the workflow icon is the workflow, and any device icon is the device. So that same information that was, if I click back here, under these lists are now in this one list here. So still makes it fairly easy to switch between those quickly.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that very quickly, as we are, over the next couple of releases, we're going to continue to add some additional changes here. Nothing obviously as major as what you see right here, but some improvements along the way. And one thing we want to take a look at is our application overview page. And I am, at least early on here, thinking that we definitely want to bring those lists of recent items, not just devices and workflows, but introduce some other recent items onto that application overview, kind of redo what you see right here to make it so that when you first jump into an application, you've got a quick way to get into whatever your recent items are, which is, of course, what you probably were most recent, whatever you are in the process of actually editing at that time.
Here's another question. This is actually a really good one. So someone here noticed this events menu is now moved up to the top. And the question is really, I see the events has moved to the top. I've always been a little confused about when to use those. Can you explain a little bit more of the purpose of events?
Yeah, events. So we think of events, and when we first created the feature, as an event is an anomaly within your application that must be acknowledged by a user, and then some sort of resolution to the event must take place before it is basically wiped off of the books. We moved it up to the top of the screen you see here. This particular application doesn't actually have any events, but if it did, there'd be a little indicator icon next to the word to indicate the number of events that are currently open. A couple of reasons we put it up there. Number one, because it is a notification that's important. We want to make sure we got it above the fold. This is a nice big screen here, and we can see the entirety of the sub-navigation. But if you were on a smaller monitor, this panel would start to scroll to accommodate all the content. And we want to make sure events made it up to the top, since it is something that is prescient and important to our users. And number two, it's doesn't really fit anywhere else, to be honest, because it kind of spans the entire application as a whole. It can be tied to device state, most commonly device state if a device is reporting something that is confusing, or really you can log an event with anything in the workflow engine. So that's why we put it at the top of the page, and how most of our Losant users are using events. There are a handful that are using them for their own purposes, and we are certainly okay with that. But with the idea in mind that it is an event is something that needs resolution and relatively quickly, we wanted to make sure we got that at front and center.
Yeah, perfect. I agree with that. There was always a little bit of confusion around events, probably due to the name. I know there's a lot of other IoT services out there that kind of refer to an event as what we would refer to as state. So an event is kind of a sensor reading coming off the device, and whereas our events are capturing much more rare occurring exceptional occurrences. So definitely can understand where that confusion comes from. A great question here. Are there plans in the near future to add additional dashboard block types, input controls in particular, as well as higher resolution maps?
Absolutely, on all counts. As far as additional dashboard block types, a lot of the types that we ultimately add to the platform come from our user recommendations in the forums. If you've got a very particular type of block in mind, please let us know. We are happy to roll them out. We love to see when people are using the new ones we introduce. As far as input controls, if there's a type of input, for those who don't know what an input controls block is, this is a dashboard block that allows it's basically a form that's embedded in a dashboard that that a user can adjust the values of. We've got like a range slider for choosing a number, text input, a Boolean toggle, that when the user clicks the button, it then fires a workflow or sends command down to a device. If there is some sort of control there that we are not covering, please let us know. We can certainly add that. As far as other dashboard types, we've got it on our horizon. It's been about a few months now. We introduced some additional gauge types to the gauge block, which is for our longtime users, it's the one that kind of looks like a semicircle wheel. I don't know if we have any on this dashboard, but here is actually the tank version of that block. And Brandon, if you wouldn't mind like navigating into one of those, and we could see how that would look under the different types. We're going to add a couple different types here. If you have any suggestions in mind, please let us know. But what I also want to do is add in the ability for you to give us basically HTML in a custom style, and we'll expose some variables to you so you could actually write your own gauge inside of this space. I don't have a timeline on that yet. It's probably going to be a couple months out. But we would expose as starting points the different gauges that you see right here. So you could copy the very source that's used for that same one to kind of either tweak it for your own needs or just to give you some inspiration for how to move forward. As far as the maps go, the resolution of the maps is kind of dependent on our provider. Like the United States has pretty high resolution. I know that there's some of our users in other parts of the world have raised that question before about the quality of the maps and of the imagery. I know that they are rolling out additional high-res images to those areas. Unfortunately, we are kind of at their mercy there. We've been told it's a couple months until we get. New Zealand was one that we got a lot of questions about, but hopefully that gets rolled out a little bit quicker.
Okay, great. This is a really cool question. Is there any planned support for management of unused or unutilized devices and dashboards? So essentially in the management of a larger number of devices across multiple applications, it can be difficult to identify resources that are unused or obsolete. That's a pretty cool feature idea. Dylan, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, if I understand correctly, I guess the way so I guess it'd be a matter of identifying which devices have not, for example, connected to the broker in an extremely long time or reported state in a very long time. We can certainly expand the search capability of the devices to bring that information in and allow users to sort and identify those devices a little bit easier. I do eventually also want to bring in some more bulk editing capabilities into the front end of the application. If you ever try to delete a device right now, it can be a bit of a slog. And we kind of did that on purpose. Deleting a device is a big deal. You don't want somebody to accidentally delete one, because once it's gone, not only is the device configuration gone, but all the data that was tied to it is also. But if you set up a test application, you spun up 100 devices, and then you eventually want to wipe those out and go to your production build, it can be it can be a little tedious to delete 100 of those devices. So I want to bring in some bulk editing capabilities, like a checkbox interface into the tables to select multiple ones and then delete them all in one swoop. Hopefully that answers the question. But yeah, it's a good point about doing a little bit better to provide tools to identify resources that are no longer really part of the application, especially if you're in a sandbox and you're trying to free up resources for other projects.
Excellent. So here's an interesting question. Essentially, do you have device templates that could be implemented in addition to the ones that we provide? So I'll start on that a little bit, and then kind of, Dylan, if you want to go into the device recipe concept. But from a high level, Losant doesn't really provide any opinionated device templates or device types. If I go into a device, really what a device is a collection of attributes, and that is entirely up to you. In this case, since this is a scale, I'm reporting the raw weight, and then since I understand how much each unit in my inventory weighs, I can calculate the units and record both of those. So the attributes are the most important piece, and then tags allow us to kind of add static configuration information. So in this case, since this serial is, or this scale connects serially, I am tagging it with the actual serial port whenever you plug it in. That allows our edge agent to connect to that serial port. And then also I have the per unit weight that allows me to do that translation from the total weight to the number of the units. So there's really no concept of kind of within Losant to say, this is a scale, this is a temperature probe, this is something else. It's really entirely defined by you. And then Dylan, you want to go into the concept of device recipes that kind of allow you to create your own templates?
Yeah, so a device recipe, if you've never used one before, is much like the name sounds. It's basically a template for quickly rolling out a number of devices that share similar attributes and similar tags. So a great example of this would be if you've got a fleet of 1,000 trucks. Well, every truck in that fleet is reporting its fuel level, it's reporting its speed, it's reporting its trajectory, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they may have some common tags, like, these 300 may be in the Northeast and these 400 may be on the West Coast. Using a device recipe, you can basically, you configure it much the same way you configure a device. The interface is extremely similar to what you're seeing right here. And then once you've configured that recipe to that you want to roll out to those number of devices, you can then do a bulk creation of those devices against that recipe. And it's not just every single device following the exact same tags that you see right here. You can actually overwrite tags during the bulk creation process via CSV. Actually, I guess it is, yeah, just strictly through CSV. So we allow you to export CSV to use as a template, make your edits, you then import it, and then you can quickly roll out that entire suite of devices.
All right, perfect. So I think I'm going to do two more questions, but while we're doing these last two, I wanted to bring up some further learning. These are great resources that we provide. The documentation that was entirely updated to represent the new navigation, so you won't see any old screenshots. We want to make sure we take great pride in our documentation, make sure it's all up to date. So go there. It's very detailed, very thorough. If you are not already utilizing Losant, please jump into Sandbox. It's a forever free tier with up to 10 devices and 1 million payloads per month, and you have access to nearly all the capabilities of even a full enterprise install. And then Losant University. So that's a great source of knowledge. It's video and workshop material. That's all hosted by Teron Foxworth, and that's a much more thorough kind of guided viewpoint through Losant and its features and functionality. So one question I wanted to give to Dylan, we talked a little bit about it already, about kind of what's coming down the line or what our ambitions are, but I think this is a great time to just ask Dylan from a higher level, what's planned? What planned updates do we have? Where do we want to go? And what other things do we want to add to our user interface?
Well, how much time you got? We do have a pretty significant backlog of the next few months of other updates we want to roll out into the second version of the interface here. Nothing that's going to be nearly as big of a bang as what you've seen here with the rollout of V2. Just off the top of my head, we want to give the workflow engine a little bit of a visual revamp. Nothing that we don't really want to alienate anybody who's already learned the ins and outs of the engine, but just make things a little bit tighter and a little bit easier for new users to dive into. Add some little interactions that make it easier to connect nodes together very quickly. I'll kind of leave it as broad like that, but that'd be one area. a couple other passes across the user interface to bring, for example, some of our alerts up to the new visual style. Perhaps introduce a notification center where a lot of the you see these little toasts pop up at the bottom of the screen that this device was created, this device was updated. Keep that somewhere in a log for people to see during a session in case they wanted to go back and replay some of the changes they made. I would very much like to bring the help, much more in line with the experience. So you had seen the search drawer that popped out before to search within an application. There is a little help icon in the bottom left corner, which at the moment, if you click on that, you'll get a little flyout menu to go check out the forums or the documentation. If you have a question about how to do something, I can almost guarantee you somebody else has posed that question before and you can find the answer there. But what I'd like to do is bring that, instead of kicking you out to that website, bring that experience inline into the interface and have it also be aware of where, contextually aware of what you're doing at that time. So as an example, if you are on a edit device page and I were to click on that help icon, the top 5 suggested results would be things about editing a device, or if that device happens to be an edge compute device, be some links about edge compute. And then directly from that interface, being able to search for additional questions you may have, or if you can't find the answer, kick over to the forums. If you have anybody's ever used TurboTax, they do something very similar, and I'm a really big fan of that. That's where that inspiration would come from. But those would be the really big things off the top of my head. There's a couple other little ones here and there that we like to address. But we're really trying to improve the experience overall and make this a little easier. Number one, to get started with Losant, and then as you become a power user in the system, to really move around quickly and not let the interface ever be the bottleneck and have it slow you down.
All right, perfect. So there's a couple of quick kind of housekeeping questions that came in that I'll get to. One was, is the new interface available for all users and sandboxes? Yep, that's true. So if you're a sandbox user, you don't have to be a paid organization to access it. Essentially what has happened, if you logged in over the last 12 hours, I think we flipped the switch yesterday at about 4:30 p.m., you will just immediately have access to all of the new functionality. Another quick question is about a video. This is recorded. You will have access to that recording afterwards. So just keep an eye out for that notification via email, and you'll be able to download and re-review this video at any time, or share it within your organization. If you do have people that weren't able to make it but would be interested in this material, please send them this recording. The last one, very important, is how can you provide feedback? I would recommend going to our forums. So a lot of what we do, a lot of the changes that we make do come from suggestions and recommendations directly from you guys. So we do have a very active forum base. It's at forums.losant.com. You can come in here. It's a great place to learn and kind of a first place I'd recommend if you do have questions, because a lot of the time someone else might have already asked it. However, if you've got a recommendation or find a bug or would like to see something different, just drop it in as a feature request. It's a great place to provide that feedback to us. And with that, just the last thing I will say is, make sure to queue up our upcoming deeper dive webinars. We've got one on March 12th, which is specifically around equipment monitoring. So unlike this one, where we're just kind of diving into specific platform features, that one's going to go into a use case and kind of show how Losant is utilized to bring that one to life. And March 26th, there is an asset tracking one, so kind of a solution-based deeper dive. We will continue these platform-specific ones. I know we already have a recommendation to go through some of the experiences functionality. I know that can be a little complicated. That's a great one to dig into. But again, if you've got recommendations for deeper dive webinars that you'd like to see around specific solutions or specific platform features, please just drop those in the forums. And with that, I will thank everyone for joining us this afternoon, and a special thanks to Dylan for making his time available to come in and answer all these technical questions. And we will see you at the next deeper dive. Thank you.